Chapter 15. Dakota. I'll park over here in the taxi zone. Good luck on your interview, Thomas said as he watched Dakota climb out in front of the imposing structure of glass and chrome. Dakota stood and looked up, maybe trying to gather her courage. But she needed a job, and if she would ever get into the university of her choice, she would need some kind of income. There was no way she would go to Ashton for anything. Dakota didn't look confident, Thomas thought. Her head lowered, but she had dressed for success. A dark blue pantsuit and white shirt and medium heel shoes. Very little makeup because frankly, she didn't need any with her flawless skin. She had finally, with Thomas' insistence, done something with her long flowing hair. With Dakota's hair pulled back and pinned, she looked gorgeous and professional. All she had to do was nail the interview, and Thomas could get back to work. It seemed that all he did lately was take care of Dakota until he felt exhausted too. It showed on his face. Not yet 30, he looked in the car mirror and saw his father at 40. When he found one gray hair, he thought his life was over. Not married yet, and he has gray hair. When Dakota neared the door of the Erickson building, she raised her head and sucked in a large breath and stepped through the doors. She found the elevator to take her to the 33rd floor. It was early and maybe too soon, she thought. Perhaps no one would be in that early. But she had wanted to give a good impression. Reaching the floor where the interview was to take place, Dakota walked off the elevator to face a large moon-shaped desk, and sitting at the counter, a young woman with dark hair. After typing something into the computer, the young woman looked up with large dark eyes and said, "Mr. Erickson will be in soon. Please have a seat over there, and when he's ready, I'll call you." She pointed to a row of leather chairs in front of a large television with split screens where CNN was on one channel, and the other channels were devoted to stocks. Taking out her smartphone, she started to text Thomas, but thought she shouldn't. She didn't want any negativity from him. Lately, he had been a downer, and she couldn't take any more of it. "Miss Bain, Mr. Erickson will see you now." Dakota smiled at the secretary and stumbled up and then stood erect. She inhaled and carried her large leather bag in her hand. "That was quick," Dakota said as she strolled past the young secretary. As she stepped across the floor near the door, she stopped and took another breath and blew it out. Then she reached for the handle to open the door, and the door opened before she touched it. The doors swung inward and she stepped into the office. Standing looking around, the doors closed behind her. The office, with its open floor plan and floor-to-ceiling windows, were circularly built around the office. No matter where you sat or looked, there was a fantastic view of Seattle. Standing in a dark suit, a tall man with dark hair stood facing the window looking out over the city. "Wonderful view, don't you think?" His voice low and sexy. She stepped closer to hear him. "Yes, it is wonderful. But distracting." Dakota never could keep from saying what she thought. "I love distractions. Distractions of all kinds keep me from focusing too much on the real world. The real world can be dreadful, don't you think?" Dakota took another step because of his lowered silky voice. Did he whisper on purpose? She wondered. When she realized she was standing at his desk not far from him. Dakota had agreed with everything he said, but she didn't want to say too much. And what would he know about the horrors of the real world, sitting in his ivory tower? That's what she intended to say, but responded with something more positive and open-ended. "I think it all depends on your perspective." The tall young man with dark silky hair and his back to Dakota reminded her of someone, but she couldn't quite figure out who. If only he would turn around so she could see that handsome face. He had to be attractive, she thought, because, from what she saw of the back of him, with his long legs and muscular arms stretching the fabric of his coat, he had to be perfect. There was no way a body like his could exist on a troll, but it has been known to happen. "Sit down, Miss Bain." The sound of his voice more natural to her ear. The man turned around after Dakota sat. The face was indeed equally as magnificent as the body, maybe more so, and dressed in an expensive suit with a blue silk tie, made the whole package more appealing than ever. "And what is your perspective, Ms. Bain?" His stride was long and confident as he neared his desk and sat. Face to face, not only the voice had sounded familiar, but the eyes. It was in the eyes that she thought she knew him. With both hands on his desk and leaning forward, he said, "Don't you recognize me, Dakota?" "Why should I recognize you? I've never seen you before." "Look closely. I didn't wear a suit. My hair wasn't neatly trimmed." Dakota blinked. "Maybe it's the beard. I wore a beard when you first laid eyes on me." Dakota's hand rushed to her mouth. "No. It can't be. Ronan? You're Mr. Erickson?" Ronan walked around the desk and stood looking down at Dakota. She turned around in her chair and rose to study his face and his once wild brown eyes. There was a calmness to them now, and he gave her a broad smile, and she recognized the strong, even white teeth with two prominent incisors. "Small world, isn't it?" And Dakota fell forward into Ronan's arms. He picked her up and placed her on his sofa. Chapter 16. Dakota. "You can't go to Ashton," Thomas said. Dakota continued, putting on her boots and her jacket. "If you expect me to take you, then you're wrong. Haven't you got over him? You have a chance to be with Ronan and live a good life. He has a lifespan like yours. I grant you he's a werewolf, and I wouldn't marry one, but he's closer to humans than Ashton is or ever will be. Think about it, Dakota." Dakota thought about it. It was all she thought about. She had to know the truth. She wanted to believe that he had been working hard to find a cure so he could be with her. She had to know for sure. She couldn't go on with her life unless he told her to. She loved too deep to ever move on. Ashton had to say to her that he no longer wanted her. She would take nothing less. Grabbing her purse, Thomas tramped behind her. Okay. I'll take you. You've been up all night, and now it's time to go to bed, and you're going to see a vampire before the sun rises. That is idiotic." She raised an eyebrow as she walked into the elevator. "I'm not calling you an idiot, Dakota, but once you get from under Ashton's spell, you will see for yourself. What is it going to take?" It wasn't that Thomas wasn't right. He may well have been right in his assessment of her, and Dakota knew it, but it would take a lot to separate her from him, and she knew it, and so did Thomas, but what would it take? Thomas wondered. In the silence and dark of the early morning, they climbed into the car and traveled across town in silence. When he stopped the vehicle, they were in front of Ashton's apartment. She jumped out and ran into the building. She had waited too late, and she wanted him to tell her not to go away with Ronan. Dakota needed him to declare his love for her and ask her to wait for him. He had more time than she. She loved him so much that she considered having him turn her just to feel his body inside her once more. She didn't ring the bell, and she passed the security without anyone noticing, because she had sneaked a peek at the code Walker put into the elevator, and she keyed it in, and the door opened into Ashton's apartment. Dakota crept through the foyer, and no one noticed because it was still dark, maybe 5 in the morning, not more than that, she thought. His people were asleep, she thought, especially Walker, but Ashton would be awake, and she felt he wouldn't let her leave without some explanation about his coldness toward her. She would sleep with him this morning and wake that night, and they would talk and they would make love. She had all these beautiful thoughts in her head when she opened the door to his room. In the darkness, she saw a pale, hard, muscular body lying on his stomach on his bed. The only satin sheet was lying on the floor. And next to him, with her arms stretched and cuffed to the headboard, and her legs opened and tied, lay Elizabeth completely naked. With a loud gasp coming from Dakota, she woke Elizabeth, who flicked her eyes around and saw that it was Dakota. With a wicked grin, her mouth pulled up on one side, she watched Dakota turn and fumble for the door and run out of the room. Before Dakota could get to the entrance to the elevator, Elizabeth stood in front of her naked, blocking her way. Did you see what you wanted? Are you satisfied now? Go away and leave us. If you don't, you will become Morgan's concubine, and no one can stop him from turning you into your worst nightmare. I will kill you before I allow that to happen to me. I will hunt you and Morgan. Elizabeth cut her off with a loud laugh, which sounded like a cackle. Did you include Ashton in your ambitious plans? He's as much to blame as anyone. He didn't have to sleep with me, but he couldn't help himself. He's what he is, a vampire and so much more. The master of everything around him. She opened her hands wide. With you, he didn't know what he was, and now with me, I have brought out that part of him which will conquer the world. You have brought out the worst part of him, and I will destroy him along with you. I think it's more out of being scorned than it's from hatred of vampires. You know nothing about Ashton. You could never satisfy him the way I can. Your little frail body couldn't tolerate what I can offer him. I can offer him children, can you? Elizabeth's jaws tightened, and she was almost tempted to turn Dakota and purge herself of this annoying human, but she knew she couldn't, not in Ashton's home. A cunning smile crossed her face. Ashton's my master, and the way I satisfy him is far more superior than lying there and just spreading your legs like you humans. How long did you think he would be satisfied with what you have to offer him? Elizabeth paced around Dakota, with Dakota wondering when Elizabeth would kill her. Dakota had made it too easy for Elizabeth, and she vowed if she got out of this, she wouldn't make it easy for Elizabeth ever again. Enough. A harsh voice came from the darkness of the foyer. Go, Elizabeth. You've done enough and said enough. She lowered her head and headed for his bedroom. No. Take the room in the cellar, and then leave when the time lock is opened. Standing against the elevator door, Dakota turned to place her hand on the button to open it. Ashton set his hand over hers. His cold hand made her shiver. She hadn't been near him in months. The warmth of Ronan's body near her had all but made her forget that Ashton had been so cold. Don't leave thinking that I'm terrible. But you are. You made me love you, and made me believe that you wanted to marry me and have children. Now I see you for what you are. Dakota's voice soft and shrill and filled with pain. She narrowed her gaze. Dakota's words shot through Ashton like a lightning bolt, quick and deadly. She couldn't have done more with her words if she had stood over him and hammered a stake into his heart, which now she was considering. Turn around, look at me, Ashton said. I can't. I want to remember you as the man I once loved. If I look at you now, I will remember what I saw in your bed. The bed I slept in with you. Dakota, listen, Ashton whispered into her ear. I can never stop loving you. I have never stopped. This is not me. I have to find Ashton, the one you loved, because I lost myself for the last months. Don't give up on me. I was that thing that you saw this morning, but I wasn't that thing when you first met me. I relapsed. I need time. I need your forgiveness. Turning around, Dakota said to Ashton, you have time. You have my lifetime and more. I don't have that long to wait on you for you to come back to me. That's why it's over. Loud breathing escaped from Ashton's mouth. A tear fell from Ashton's eyes as he leaned his head against hers. A warm tear fell from Dakota's eyes, and their tears mingled. You need to leave. The sun is rising, Dakota said. Her voice was lifeless. I would rather die now than to hear you tell me you will never see me again. As the sun broke from the clouds, the heat around Ashton became suffocating to him, and when Dakota touched his body, she saw and smelled his hair burning. Go, Ashton. I'm not going anywhere. I'll be here waiting for you. Reluctantly, Ashton strode away, looking back as if he thought Dakota would fade away as he took each step. She stood there watching him close the door, and when it was locked, she stole out of his apartment and rushed to Thomas. Drive, Thomas. Drive? Thomas backed the car out of the space and turned the wheels quickly, and sped down the road going 70 miles an hour. When he caught his breath, he turned to Dakota. What did you see that made you frightened? I wasn't frightened. I was angry. So angry I wanted to kill Ashton. I could, you know. I could sneak in there and put a stake in his heart, and Elizabeth's. Thomas's car came to a screeching halt after he slowed the car, and pulled it to the side of the road, and put on his hazard lights. The sun had breached the clouds, and Thomas saw Dakota's eyes. She had changed, and not for good. She was breathing loud, and looking out the window like a mad person. What is wrong with you, Dakota? I never saw you like this. Tears streamed down her face, not from mourning the loss of Ashton, but from anger. Wiping the tears with her hands only to be replaced by more tears. Settle down, Dakota, and tell me what happened. Ashton had been sleeping with Elizabeth when I thought he loved me. Oh, is that all? I thought you were being chased by the devil, meaning Ashton. As Thomas spoke, he pulled from the side of the road into ongoing traffic. It's a good thing you don't have to work today and tomorrow. You could never face Ronan with those swollen eyes. He would know right away that you are pining over that vampire. You have a good thing going with that handsome werewolf. He's rich and young and on the surface, a very respectable human. Not like Ashton, who's probably hundreds of years old. Even with his pretty boy looks, he's old as sin. You're not making me feel better, Thomas. I'm not trying to make you feel good, that's going to take a long time. You need to get real. That thing you have with Ashton is gone. Forget him and move on. It's not easy to move on from the first man you've ever loved and will not likely again. That's the talk of a young girl who hasn't had another man. Fuck the werewolf, and see if you will want to be bothered with that vampire and his concubine. She's a vampire tramp. She will fuck anyone who's in power. And all the power rests with those brothers, so she fucks both of them, and soon she will control them both. I know. I've seen this before. The only thing it happened to my brothers. But these were humans. You have brothers, Thomas? You never mention your family. Yes. Is that so alien in your narrow world? I haven't mentioned my family because I've been embroiled in your drama, and I don't want them involved. It's enough I might not live to see them dealing with vampires and werewolves. And sad as it is, your future looks dim. I've lived a life, but you haven't. I've had my share of women and seen the world, and you had one man and never been anywhere. Thomas drove into the garage and parked the car.